Shaq walked into the boutique with calm steps and a story no price tag could measure. The saleswoman took one look, hoodie, sneakers, and laughed off the request for a $280,000 watch. But what seemed like a joke turned into a lesson. Without raising a voice or flashing a name, Big Shaq shifted the room. By the time the truth landed, the saleswoman wasn't just shocked. The entire idea of value had been rewritten. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Downtown Los Angeles had its own rhythm. Not the kind that played through speakers, but the kind that pulsed through marble floors and glass walls, where time cost more than money, and people walked as if the sidewalk belonged to their lineage. On this particular Tuesday, the sun filtered through high-rise buildings like a spotlight, catching the reflections off tinted windows and chrome cars. Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as Big Shaq, walked against that rhythm. He wore a deep navy hoodie, plain black joggers, and sneakers so clean they seemed to glide. His frame, massive and commanding, turned heads, but not because anyone recognized him. Not here. This part of LA wasn't built to notice men dressed like memories from the block. It was built to filter, to gate, to assume, and that's exactly what it did when Shaq pushed open the door of Maison de Tom, an exclusive luxury boutique known for its selective service and sterile smiles. The air inside was chilled, dry like a museum. Glass cases lined the floor, each holding timepieces worth more than most used cars. A soft classical piano track hummed in the background, though it felt less like music and more like a warning. You don't belong unless you know the composer. The staff, 2 men and 1 woman, looked up briefly before returning to their tasks, each movement rehearsed. The woman in stilettos and a platinum bun that looked like it had been tightened with a ruler glanced at Shaq. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, that flash of evaluation, the kind that calculated status before a word was spoken. Shaq stepped forward, his footsteps heavier than they sounded. He knew the type of place this was, knew the type of people it was built for, or rather the type of people it claimed to be built for. He'd walked through doors like this before, back when the world didn't know his name, before championships and shoe deals, before people stopped looking through him and started looking at him. But some things never change. He moved quietly toward the center display, where a singular spotlight bathed an exquisite Swiss-made timepiece in warm light. It was sleek, all black titanium with a skeleton dial that revealed the inner mechanism like a heartbeat. No price tag, just a discreet label. Private selection. He stood before it, still just looking. He thought of his mother, Lucille, and the way she used to hold his face between her hands after a long day of cleaning other people's offices. Time's the one thing they can't steal from you, unless you let them. He didn't need the watch. It wouldn't make him more successful or more worthy. But it meant something to him. A marker, a moment, a silent gesture to himself that he could own what once felt unreachable. "Can I help you with something?" The voice came sharp, not rude, but not welcoming either. It was the woman. Her name tag read Brielle, etched in gold over burgundy silk. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Shaq looked up. "Yeah," he said casually. "I'd like to see that one." Brielle's gaze flicked down to the display, then back up to him, lingering on the hoodie, the sneakers, the lack of visible wealth. She paused, too long, then let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't far off. A sound more insulting than any insult could be. "That piece starts at $280,000, she said lightly, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "It's reserved for private clients, but we have some other pieces if you're looking for something more accessible." There was no malice in her tone. That's what made it worse. It was the tone of someone who believed they were being reasonable. Shaq felt the moment hit him. Not hard, but surgical. A small, clean cut you didn't notice until it started bleeding later. He didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't say his name. That was the thing about being known. It didn't mean anything when people had already decided what you were worth. He gave a small nod and turned to leave. His shoulders relaxed, face unreadable. Outside, the city still pulsed. People rushed by with coffee cups and phone calls, oblivious to what had just happened inside. Shaq leaned against the side of the boutique building, the sun warming his hoodie, and smiled. A slow, private smile that didn't reach his eyes either. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But something had clicked. A familiar feeling, deep in his chest. Not rage, not sadness. Just that old, steady realization. They still don't see you. Not really. He pulled out his phone and typed a message, short, precise, to someone he hadn't spoken to in months. Then he slipped his phone back into his pocket and crossed the street, walking back into the rhythm of a city that only seemed to hear you once you made noise loud enough to echo. Later that afternoon, while sipping a protein shake in the back of a private gym, he watched a recording from the store's interior. His assistant had been wearing a button cam, planted inside the ball cap of a delivery guy, who'd walked in minutes before Shaq and captured the whole encounter. The footage was crisp, the snicker was audible, the assumption undeniable. Shaq's eyes narrowed slightly, not with vengeance, but with purpose. He'd lived long enough to know that real change didn't come from shouting. It came from showing. And that boutique, that laugh, that assumption, they were about to learn what time really meant. By sunset he was on a call with Cambria Vale, a woman whose watchmaking studio he'd once invested in when no one else would. She had taste, class, and a sharp sense of justice. She also had a way with design that felt more like storytelling. He told her the story. Every word, every detail. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, there was a pause. Then she said, "Let's make something they've never seen." The next morning, Shaq sat at his kitchen island, overlooking the city. His daughter Manara stopped by to say good morning. She looked at him curiously. "You good, Dad?" He nodded, smiling softly. "Yeah, baby girl. Just thinking."
He didn't explain. No need. Manara, wise beyond her years, kissed him on the cheek and went off to her morning class. Shaq stared out the window for a long time. He didn't want revenge. That was too easy. What he wanted was for them to look back one day and realize they'd missed the whole story, because they'd only ever read the cover. He thought of Lucille again. Thought of that old Timex she wore like armor. Thought of the way she used to whisper, "People will try to shorten your time in the room. Make sure they remember how you used it." By the end of the week, meetings were in place. Plans were drawn. Cambria had already begun designing something custom. Not just a watch, but a message. A watch that watched back. And as for the boutique, they had no idea who they'd dismissed. Not yet. But time, as they say, tells all. And this time, it was about to speak very clearly. At the counter, Brielle laughed. Not loudly, but with that kind of ease that comes when no one's watching. Her curls bounced as she tilted her head, brushing her knuckle against her cheek, caught mid-joke with one of the interns. She was effortless, full of life in the way people were before the world trained it out of them. Sloan saw it too. He leaned against the edge of the counter, arms folded, Armani crisp. His smile didn't reach his eyes, but his eyes tracked everything. The laugh, the movement, the lightness. He didn't say a word. Shaq saw him, just as he saw the way Sloane's gaze lingered on people he thought beneath him. Customers who didn't dress right, didn't speak right, staff who smiled too wide. It was all the same to him. Noise. Shaq never smiled back. The customers didn't notice. They saw only what they wanted to see. A man too big to be gentle. Someone who looked like security but moved like background. He kept folding shirts. Flashback Newark. The bank teller never looked up. Shaq's mother stood patiently, her hands wrapped around the paycheck she'd been waiting all week to deposit. The line had cleared. The teller reached for the next button, paused, then pressed it anyway. A blonde woman in heels stepped up, smiled, got help. Shaq, just 13 then, had seen the heat rise in his mother's neck. The polite, rehearsed expression she wore like armor didn't crack. She didn't complain. She didn't flinch. When they got back outside, she turned to him and said quietly, "Never give them what they expect. Not anger, not fear. Keep your smile." He didn't smile for a year. After that. Now in the boutique, Brielle's laughter faded. She glanced at Shaq. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before returning to the row of cuffed jeans he'd been straightening for 20 minutes. His hands moved with quiet precision. Sloane turned and walked away. Shaq's gaze flicked toward Brielle again. Her smile had dropped. She wasn't laughing now. In high school gym. "Yo, Frankenstein. Maybe try not to break his ribs this time." The coach's voice echoed against the bleachers. Laughter followed. Shaq stood alone on the court, holding the ball like it was made of glass. The kid he'd accidentally elbowed was fine. Dramatic, but fine. "Just play gentle, man," someone muttered, patting his shoulder like they were doing him a favor. Shaq nodded. He learned to pass before the whistle blew. To never block too hard, even if he could. To avoid dunking in practice. To make himself less. He started walking with a slight hunch after that. Took up less space.
He stopped playing altogether by senior year. Back at the boutique, a customer fumbled a leather belt, knocking a whole display to the floor. Shaq was there before the pieces hit the ground. He crouched without a sound, collecting each item carefully, laying them back one by one. The woman, older, sharp lipstick, impatient, didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to, but Brielle did. Softly, almost like she didn't want to interrupt the rhythm he had. You good? Shaq paused, then nodded again. Yeah, always. But he wasn't. Not always. Flashback. Rutgers campus. A professor said it like a compliment. You speak so well. You know, considering. Shaq hadn't asked considering what. Another time, a classmate invited him to a poetry reading. Said, I think it'd be inspiring for you. A lot of people with your story there. He didn't go. At home, his mother was still working 2 jobs. Still getting mistaken for the cleaning lady at the same bank where she'd once waited in line for 20 minutes to be ignored. Shaq graduated early, didn't attend the ceremony. His mother cried about that for weeks. At the boutique, the AC hummed low and constant. Shaq stood near the fitting rooms now, folding scarves no one ever touched. He watched as a young man entered, late 20s, loud, confident spilling from him, in designer joggers and off-white sneakers. Sloan was on him in seconds, tone changing like a switch flipped. Welcome in, he smiled, all teeth now. Looking for something special? The man said he had a shoot next week. Sloan ushered him toward a private rack, not for just anyone. Shaq caught Brielle's glance. She'd seen it too. Flashback, first job interview. Honestly, Shaq, the manager had said, smiling like it hurt. You seem more suited to back-of-house roles. You know, storage, maybe. Security. He'd worn his best suit, polished his shoes twice. When he asked for feedback, they said, we're looking for someone who fits the brand, more approachable. He didn't get a second interview. Now at the boutique, Brielle approached the water cooler. Shaq stood beside it, wiping down a shelf. She didn't speak at first. Then gently, you ever get tired of pretending? Shaq looked at her. What makes you think I am? She shrugged, but her voice was low. Because I'm exhausted, smiling at people who treat you invisible. Sloan talks to me like I'm temporary. You're not, Shaq said simply. You think he even knows my last name? Shaq didn't answer. He knew the answer. So did she.
A pause.
You ever gonna say something to him, she asked. Shaq met her eyes. Not yet. Flashback. His mother's apartment. People think silence means weakness, she said, handing him a cup of tea. Shaq nodded. But silence can also mean restraint, dignity, power. He held the cup with both hands. What if I'm done being silent? She smiled. Then speak when it counts. Not before. In the boutique, Sloan clapped his hands together. Team meeting. 5 minutes, he called. Already walking toward the back office. Everyone groaned. Everyone except Shaq. Brielle rolled her eyes. Here we go again. The team gathered, 6 of them. Semicircle around the couch where Sloan always sat like it was a throne. Sales are down, he started. And we're not converting enough high-end clients. We need to elevate presentation, smile more, offer water, be aspirational. He gestured vaguely toward Brielle. That laugh earlier? That's the vibe. Light, chic, not heavy. Shaq's jaw tightened. No one said anything. Brielle lowered her eyes. Later, as the day wound down, Brielle passed Shaq a clipboard with stock numbers. You okay? Shaq looked at the paper. Just tired. You don't talk much. I talk enough. She hesitated. You know, you see everything. You don't miss a thing. One day you're gonna say it all. You think he's ready for that? Shaq smiled for the first time all day. Not big, but real. No. But I am. Flashback, Newark sidewalk, present day. Shaq walked beside his mother, now older but still standing proud. A man bumped into her, didn't apologize. She didn't flinch. You good? He asked her. She looked up. Always. In the boutique, closing time neared. Shaq locked the front door. Lights dimmed. Sloan passed by with a nod, distracted. Shaq didn't respond. Instead, he walked toward Brielle, who stood folding a last stack of shirts. You were right, he said. She glanced up. About what? I'm tired of pretending. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to explain. Brielle smiled. Not the customer service kind. The real kind. Behind them, Sloane's office door creaked open. Shaq didn't look back. There were only 3 customers inside the boutique when Shaq stepped through the glass doors that morning. But you wouldn't know it from how fast Brielle reached for the phone. "Hey, welcome in," she said with a wide smile, already lifting the receiver halfway to her ear. "Give me just a sec. I've got a call I need to take." "Hello?" "Yes. Hi. This is Brielle." Her eyes flicked to him. Just a second too long. Just enough to make it clear she wasn't really on a call. Shaq gave a polite nod and let the moment pass. No anger, no sigh, just the quiet sense of having seen it before. He walked slowly toward the high-end display, his hoodie pulled over his head, sweatshirt loose and worn in that way that made certain types nervous. His jeans were clean but faded, shoes unlaced. He looked like someone browsing, not buying. But he wasn't here to browse. The glass case stood before him, backlit and polished, housing pieces so exclusive they didn't even display the price tags. But Shaq knew them well, especially the centerpiece, a black-on-black ceramic wristwatch with a gold skeleton dial, sleek and restrained, retailing at $280,000, though only collectors knew that. Only people with certain connections could even ask to see it. Shaq didn't raise his voice. He didn't clear his throat. He simply waited. Brielle continued her fake call, turning away slightly, as if shielding herself from the inconvenience of him. The only other sales associate, Tyler, was already leading another man, mid-40s white, wearing a linen blazer and a Rolex, through the side curtain into the boutique's VIP lounge. They didn't even glance at Shaq. "Thank you," Brielle said, hanging up after her imaginary caller said goodbye. She turned, adjusting her earpiece. "Can I help you find something?" Shaq gestured toward the display, with the gentleness of someone handling memory, not money. "I'd like to see the Regulus shadow, please." Brielle blinked. That one's not out for try-ons. It's, reserved for specific clientele." "I understand," Shaq said. He didn't smile. He didn't frown either. "I'd still like to see it." She hesitated, glancing toward the back where Sloane's office light glowed faintly. "I can ask a manager," she said. But she didn't move. She looked at his hoodie again. "Is there something more in your range you'd like to start with?" Shaq paused for just a second. "No." Then, quietly, he turned and walked out of the store. No argument, no scene. He knew how that script ended. He wasn't giving them that. Outside, the sun had shifted. Not hot yet, but sharp enough to make the glass storefront reflect more than it revealed. He caught his own reflection. The hoodie, the posture, the stillness. And then he smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. It always did, in that low, bone-deep kind of way. But he smiled because they hadn't even begun to imagine who he was, or who they were about to meet. That night he called Cambria. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm but sharp, like a chord struck clean. "Took you long enough. I was starting to think you ghosted." Shaq laughed softly. "You know I'm too boring to ghost anybody." "Lie," she said. "You just vanish when you're planning something." There was a pause. He didn't deny it. Cambria was more than a friend. She was an architect of moments. One of those rare people who could build stories into experiences, wrap truth inside luxury, and sell it at a premium to people who thought they were buying taste. Years ago, Shaq had helped her quietly when her first collection was dismissed by 3 major buyers. Now she ran her own label and advised watch companies on how to break the heritage mold. She didn't just design, she disrupted. "I need a favor," he said. Cambria grinned through the line. "Tell me everything." By the weekend, the plan was in motion.
Not a takedown, not revenge, something more deliberate, more poetic, a redirection of energy, emotional judo.
Shaq made a few calls, one to an investor friend in LA, who owed him a favor from a branding deal gone sideways. Another to the director of a cultural magazine that had featured him once in a piece about invisible innovators. The third most strategic was to a woman named Rhonda J., who curated celebrity watch pieces for auction houses. Her endorsement meant your brand wasn't just hot, it was historic. They all said yes, not because they owed him, but because when Shaq called, people listened. Monday morning, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Cambria. She wore midnight blue sculpted blazer, tapered pants, stilettos like weapons. Her earrings glittered in the sunlight, and behind her 2 assistants stepped out carrying a locked silver case. Brielle blinked. Sloane rushed to the front. "Miss Warren," he beamed, already smoothing his shirt. This is an honor. Cambria gave him a once-over smile. We're here to preview a few pieces for a potential cross-branding installation. One of our longtime collectors asked for discretion.
Of course, Sloane said.
Our VIP lounge is prepped. Behind her, Shaq stepped out of the car. Same hoodie, same quiet steps. Brielle froze. Shaq didn't look at her. Not yet. He walked beside Cambria like he belonged there. Because he did. They entered together, and the boutique doors closed behind them, with a soft click. Inside the VIP lounge, silence lingered for a second too long. Sloane looked confused. So which collector are we speaking of? Cambria looked to Shaq. He finally met Sloane's eyes. Me. Sloane's brow lifted, then lowered. You. Shaq took a seat. Relaxed. Comfortable. I've been working with Cambria for about 6 years. She advised me when I picked up my first 3 Regulus watches. 2 custom, 1 limited drop. I was one of their early private clients before the brand went international. Sloane's mouth opened, then closed again. Cambria set the silver case on the table and clicked it open. Inside, the watches shimmered, not loud, but resonant. Style with memory. Each one unique, each one expensive, in a way that wasn't just about money. We're curating a traveling collection, Cambria said, her voice smooth and clipped. Only boutiques with certain reputations will be included. Your store was on the short list. Sloane nodded quickly. Of course. Of course. That's incredible. But, she added lightly, we do require an internal culture check. Client treatment. First impressions. All of it. Shaq watched him squirm. Still, he didn't raise his voice. Didn't change his tone. He didn't have to. Outside the lounge, Brielle stood frozen near the watch display, staring at the closed curtain. Tyler whispered, "Do you know who that is?" She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because suddenly she did. Later that afternoon, Cambria and her team left with the same precision they arrived with. The boutique buzzed quietly. Sloane had disappeared into his office. Shaq remained a little longer, standing near the Regulus case again. Brielle approached him slowly. "I didn't know," she said. "Before. I figured," he replied. He wasn't cruel, just honest. "You're not mad?" she asked. Shaq thought about it. "I was. Not anymore." She looked down. "I'm sorry." Shaq nodded. "That's a start." She hesitated. "That smile you had the other day, when you left. What was that?" "That," he said, "was me remembering who I am."
Then he walked out.
No scene. No lecture. But everyone noticed. Shaq sat with his mother on their old porch, sipping coffee. She looked at his hands. "You still folding everything neat, huh? Muscle memory. You always were patient," she said. "But don't let that patience shrink you." "I'm not small, ma." She smiled. "I know. Just don't make yourself small for them either." Present day. 3 days later, the boutique's social media posted a sudden update. Honored to have collaborated with cultural strategist Cambria Warren and collector Shaquille O'Neal for an exclusive timepiece preview. They tagged Cambria. Not Shaq. But the followers found him anyway. The reposts came quickly. A few industry sites picked it up. Then a culture blog wrote, "The giant in the hoodie. How Shaquille O'Neal reminded luxury who it's for." The boutique stayed silent. But things shifted. Brielle started treating every customer like they might be someone. Tyler asked for a copy of Cambria's book. Sloane? He started keeping his door open. Change wasn't loud. It was quiet, controlled, like a smile before a storm. Shaq? He didn't come back. He didn't need to. "Thank you," he said finally. Voice steady. "Not for the welcome, but for the space. Because space isn't something people like me are always given." He looked across the room. Calmly. Intentionally. "I was once told that I didn't fit the brand. That I was better suited for storage, or silence, or standing in the corner." The room tensed. "I wore a hoodie to a watch store not long ago," he continued. "I asked to see something I already owned. The staff didn't recognize me. They didn't ask questions. They made assumptions." He paused. "Let it land. I smiled when I left, not because I was unaffected, but because I remembered who I was, and who they weren't ready to meet." Near the back, Brielle's face flushed. Not with shame exactly. With recognition. Sloane stood frozen, lips slightly parted. Shaq kept going. "I'm not here to shame anyone. That's not transformation. That's spectacle. And spectacle is easy. Judgment is easy. Image is easy. But value? That's harder. That requires work. He gestured to the room. Look at the people around you. Philanthropists, innovators, artists, politicians, legacy and influence in every direction. But value doesn't walk in wearing a name tag. And sometimes, it walks in wearing a hoodie. A few guests chuckled. Nervously. Delaney smiled wide. I'm a collector. Of timepieces, yes. But also of moments like this. Moments where you can choose to see differently, where silence isn't compliance. It's strategy. He closed his speech slowly, deliberately. You can't measure people by what they wear, or how quietly they move. You measure them by what they bring into the room, even when the room doesn't want them there. He stepped back. No bow, no grin, just gravity. Applause. This time real, strong, sustained. After the speech, the atmosphere had shifted. Sloane attempted to re-enter the circle, now desperate to pivot. He greeted a guest loudly, using words like visionary and trailblazer. No one listened. Jasper pulled out a pen to sign a check. Delaney made a speech of her own at another table, quoting Shaq's line about value walking in with a hoodie. Within minutes it was trending on Twitter. Cambria, watching from the balcony above, simply sipped her drink, satisfied. Shaq stayed briefly, shaking hands, posing for a few respectful photos. Then he quietly exited through the side door, unbothered by who noticed. Outside, as the air cooled and the city lights flickered against the gala's white marble, Braille followed. She caught up with him near the valet. Hey, she said. He turned. She hesitated. That speech, you meant it for more than just them. I did. She nodded. I deserved that. Or part of it. Shaq shrugged. It wasn't about you. But if it reached you, then maybe it was supposed to. She exhaled. You changed something in there. Shaq looked past her toward the building. Not yet. But it's starting. She stepped back. Thanks for not making it personal. It was personal, he said. But it wasn't petty. The car pulled up. Black, low, quiet. Shaq got in. The door shut. Brielle watched it disappear into the traffic. Velvet suit, velvet silence, and wondered how long the boutique could pretend they hadn't seen him now. The room was dim, velvet draped and candle warmed, filled with the kind of hush that signaled anticipation. Shaq stepped up to the mic. Not rushed, not grand, just present. He wore the same midnight velvet tux from the gala's opening night. But something about him was different now. Not just sharper, fuller. He stood in the stillness like he'd earned it. Like this wasn't a platform given, but one built from the ground up. Good evening, he began, voice low and warm, like the start of a bedtime story. Tonight, I want to tell you about a watch. The room settled deeper. Even the sound crew froze. But not the kind you think. He paused, letting the space stretch. I want to tell you about a Thursday afternoon. Newark, 1994. I was 9, standing in line at a grocery store with my mother. Her hands were cracked from cleaning houses. Her back hurt from a job she'd never get recognition for. We had bread, eggs and beans in our basket. Just that. Brielle's eyes didn't blink. Sloane leaned forward slightly in his chair, face unreadable. Shaq continued. My mom pulled out her food stamps. The paper kind, the ones that looked like Monopoly money. And the clerk, maybe 19, maybe 20, laughed. Said, you really think this is enough? Not to her hands, to her silence. He looked up, scanning the room, eyes soft but charged. I wanted to say something, but I was 9, and small, and all I could do was watch. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That clerk didn't know the woman standing there would one day raise a man who'd create job programs for single mothers. That kid with his fists clenched in his hoodie pocket would one day help feed thousands. Not to make a point, but to unmake one. A breath moved through the audience like wind through a cathedral. Quiet, but thick. This story isn't just about hunger or humility. It's about value, about how some people are trained to see worth only when it shines, only when it speaks their language, walks their walk, wears their uniform. His eyes rested briefly on Sloane, then on Brielle. I didn't forget that moment, but I also didn't let it harden me, because pain, when processed right, becomes clarity. He reached into his tux pocket and slowly pulled out a watch. It gleamed under the light, not flashy, but arresting. Midnight black ceramic, gold skeleton dial, just like the Regulus shadow the boutique kept behind glass. But this one had something different, something deeper. Etched into the bezel in looping script were words, names, dates, fragments too small to read from far away, but clearly personal, intentional. "This is the watch I came to see a few weeks ago," he said calmly. "The one I was told wasn't for me." A ripple moved through the crowd. "But this isn't from that boutique. This is from Cambria Warren's line. Custom, commissioned, built with fragments of real letters from black families across the country. Letters of endurance. Notes from sons to mothers. From daughters to grandfathers. From past to future." He held it up like a relic. "I call it the watch that watched me back." Silent. Not stunned. Reverent. Because unlike most watches, this one doesn't just measure time. It remembers it. It reminds me who I am. Who I came from. And who was watching when I was told I didn't belong. The room breathed again, audibly now. Some with nods. Others with lowered eyes. He looked toward the boutique display at the back, still propped up like an altar to exclusivity. "I'm not here to shame anyone, but I am here to unmask something. The way we confuse cost with character. The way we decide who gets service, who gets silence, who gets seen." His tone remained warm, but the warmth had edges now. 2 weeks ago, I walked into a store. I asked to see a watch I already understood more intimately than the people selling it. I was ignored, avoided, and I left, not because I was powerless, but because power doesn't always need to announce itself. Sloane's posture was stiff. He wasn't moving. Rielle, hands folded in her lap, looked down, but not out of guilt, out of recognition, of how close she'd come to staying blind. Shaq lowered the watch slowly. His next words were quieter, slower. "This watch doesn't just tick. It testifies." He smiled. "Not to charm. To release. It tells me I'm still that boy. That no matter how sharp the tucks or how smooth the speech, I carry every moment. And the difference now, I speak." He closed the box and placed it gently on the podium. "But it's not just my story. It's yours too. Everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated. Everyone told they were too loud or too quiet, too dark or too different, too poor or too proud." A pause. "So tonight I ask you not to check the time, but to check yourselves. What do you carry that's been overlooked? What truths are waiting for their voice?" No applause yet, just air thick with everything unsaid. Then, slowly, it began. Not in bursts, in waves. A slow rise of standing bodies. First a few, then most, then all. Shaq stepped back, bowed his head once, a gesture of gratitude, not victory, and exited the stage as quietly as he had entered. Backstage, Cambria waited with a knowing look, and no words. She just touched his shoulder as he passed. Outside, city lights pulsed in rhythm with something deeper now. Something unnameable, but unmistakable. Shaq stepped into the night, not to disappear, but to resonate. Inside, Brielle sat for several minutes after the event ended, not moving, not speaking. When she finally stood, she walked to the back, near the boutique's display, and unpinned her name tag. She didn't break anything, didn't storm out. She just folded it, set it on the table beside the watches, and walked away. Later that night, a post began trending. Shaquille O'Neal just redefined time, and we were all on the clock. That clipped tone, that's reserved for specific clientele, echoed through the room like a ricochet. Then, the pause. Shaq leaving without complaint. The screen lingered there, the back of him walking out, and for a moment, no one moved. Then the voiceover came. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Just Shaq, narrating off-screen. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is say nothing. Let them speak. Let them reveal what they think you are. Then watch what happens when you tell your story, your way. A few gasps. Some murmured recognition, but mostly, stillness. The footage faded into the next segment. Cambria's boutique. The watch being crafted. Artisans brushing gold dust into the etching. Names being inscribed. Letters being folded into design. A mother's voice reading aloud one of the notes etched into the timepiece. You are seen, even when the world pretends it doesn't see you. Then the gala. Tonight, Shaq's speech. His watch. The moment he called it the watch that watched me back. Guests now watched themselves watching him. Watching their reactions in real time. The mirror was complete. And then, the screen cut to black. The last image, Shaq's silhouette on stage, just as he had stood hours earlier. The closing words, "Never judge a book by the cover, especially when that book built the library." The lights rose slowly, but no one clapped. Not out of disrespect, out of awe. Reflection. Maybe in the front row, Lucille O'Neill sat silent, her hands folded in her lap. A pearl-colored shawl rested gently on her shoulders. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered, not from hurt, but from endurance. Shaq turned from where he'd been standing quietly in the corner of the lounge. He hadn't watched the footage. He didn't need to. He had lived every frame. He walked forward slowly and stopped just in front of Lucille.
No word.
Just a quiet nod. The kind sons give to mothers who never stopped believing, even when no one else looked twice. Across the room, the boutique staff stood suspended. Sloan was pale. He made a move toward the hallway but hesitated. Cameras were still present. So was the press. So were the guests he had tried to impress. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Brielle took a step back from the crowd. Not hiding, just peeling away. She watched as the screen replayed in her mind. Not just the footage, the feeling. The way she'd glanced at Shaq. The way she hadn't questioned her own instinct to doubt. The silence she hadn't thought would echo so loudly in public. But now, here it was. Not a private moment of regret, but a public reckoning. She walked toward Shaq. Slowly, one step at a time, not seeking redemption, just truth. He saw her, waited. "I didn't know it was being filmed," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I did," he said, not harshly, just evenly. "That's not the point, though." She nodded, swallowing. "I don't expect you to forgive that moment." He looked at her, eyes clear. "I forgave it before I walked out. That doesn't mean I forgot it." She looked down. "What you said, about pain becoming clarity. I'm starting to understand." Shaq's expression didn't soften or harden. It remained composed, measured. "Then use it. Don't just understand. Shift something." She nodded again. This time slower. This time meaning it. The next morning, headlines rolled in like tide. Shaquille O'Neal shatters perceptions with hidden documentaries reveal. Luxury gets a lesson. Boutique caught in bias controversy at gala. The watch that watched back. A moment luxury will never forget. The footage went viral before the brunch buffet even cleared. Cambria's boutique was tagged in every post. So was the quote, "Never judge a book by the cover, especially when that book built the library." One outlet added a side-by-side still. Shaq in his hoodie at the store, and then Shaq on stage, suited, watch raised like a flag. The juxtaposition was damning. And necessary. By noon, the boutique issued a public statement, vague, cautious, and full of corporate phrasing. By 2, it was already being memed. But Shaq, he posted nothing. His silence wasn't passive, it was placement. Later that week, Lucille joined him for dinner at a quiet rooftop bistro overlooking the city, the kind of place she used to pass by, assuming it wasn't for her. Now, it welcomed her like it had been waiting. She lifted her wine glass. "You know what made me proudest?" He smiled. "Wasn't the speech?" "No," she said. "It was that you didn't need to destroy anyone to lift yourself up. You built a mirror instead." He nodded. They had to see it, not just hear it. "And the watch?" He looked at it, still on his wrist. "It reminds me I don't just belong in the room," he said. "I am the room." Lucille raised her glass. "To the boy who built the library." They clinked glasses and let the night speak for them. The email arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon, 2 days after the documentary's footage had dropped, and turned the boutique's name into a national case study. It came without fanfare, no logo, no stylized header, just a name in the sender line, Shaquille O'Neal. Brielle read it twice before moving, then again, slower. There was no accusation, no sarcasm, no condescension, just an invitation. "There's a program I sponsor outside the city. A 2-week immersion. Business, finance, brand strategy. But led by youth, not for them. You might learn something. They definitely will. If you're open, let me know." No period after that final sentence. Just a space. A breath. She sat with it for a long time. Not because she didn't want to go, but because she didn't know why he wanted her to. The first morning, the sun came early and loud. The building looked nothing like what she'd pictured. No glass towers, no metallic logos. Just an old repurposed school, on the edge of a quiet burrow, painted a warm sand color with bright murals covering its walls. One was of a black girl in oversized glasses holding a blueprint like it was a map to the future. Another of a boy planting coins into the soil beneath him like seeds. The sign out front read, "The Lucille Initiative." Inside, the energy was focused but alive. Rooms buzzed with conversation that didn't sound like school, and didn't quite sound like business either. It sounded like becoming. Shaq wasn't there when she arrived. Instead, a staffer named Kendra handed her a canvas lanyard and a folded schedule. No one treated her like a guest. No one treated her like a villain. Either. Just someone who showed up and would now need to show up. Her first session was with a group of teens, mapping supply chains using sticky notes, string, and post-it timelines. They didn't look twice at her. She watched, then joined, and slowly found her place at the edge of the circle. By lunch, someone asked her to explain how luxury goods handled international sourcing. She stumbled through it, not because she didn't know, but because she was unused to being asked without judgment. They nodded, asked more. Something inside her shifted. By day 3, Brielle found herself volunteering for breakout discussions. She sat beside a girl named Nia, who spoke with sharp confidence about product psychology, how design aesthetics manipulate desire, how marketing speaks to insecurity in disguise. "I used to think people bought luxury because it made them feel powerful," Nia said, "but now I think they buy it because they don't feel powerful." "Not really." Brielle blinked. "You sound like you've worked in the industry for years." Nia shrugged. "Maybe in a past life." Brielle laughed. But part of her didn't. Because deep down she knew Nia was right. Not just about the market, but about her. That night, back in her modest Airbnb, Brielle sat on the floor with her shoes kicked off and her blazer discarded over a chair. She pulled up an old photo from her phone, a shot of her at 22, freshly hired, standing in the boutique's lobby in a tight bun and stiff smile. She looked so eager, so perfectly arranged. She remembered what her first manager told her during training. "Our job isn't to help everyone. It's to help the right ones feel like they belong." Back then, she had taken that as truth. Had believed the lie that luxury meant exclusion, and her power came from being a gatekeeper. She hadn't known how to question it. Now she couldn't stop questioning everything. Shaq showed up on the 5th day. Not with a camera crew, not with fanfare, just a simple gray tee, dark jeans, and a soft greeting for the staff as he passed through the halls. Brielle saw him from across the courtyard, and instinctively stood straighter, unsure what to say. He saw her, nodded, and gestured toward a bench under a wide oak tree. They sat. "You've been showing up," he said, not as a compliment, just a fact. "I have," she replied. "How's it been?" "Like holding up a mirror. I didn't know I'd been avoiding." He nodded. "That's how it starts." There was a pause. Then Brielle spoke, quieter. "I used to think it was enough to be polite, to not say the wrong thing. But I see now. The silences were loud. Politeness without awareness is just performance," Shaq said gently, "and performance without reflection becomes policy." She looked at him. "Why did you invite me here?" "Because you didn't double down when you got called out. You listened. That's rare. And because I believe in giving people a place to practice new truths." Another pause. "I don't deserve credit for being here," she added. Shaq shook his head. "Redemption's not a reward. It's a slow dance. And you don't dance for applause. You dance to move." Over the next week, Brielle kept moving. She shadowed a 12-year-old boy named Elijah, who was building a pitch deck for a youth-run courier service. His vision was precise. His language sharper than some of the executives she used to assist. When he spoke, she didn't just hear potential. She heard reality forming. She co-led a brand session with Nia, who now called her B like they'd known each other longer. Brielle started dressing more casually, trading heels for sneakers. Not as a costume, but because she finally felt comfortable enough to stop performing. One morning, she found herself helping paint a mural outside, adding outlines of watch gears beneath a sunburst. A girl beside her asked what the design meant. Brielle paused, brush in hand. "It means, time doesn't belong to the people who sell it," she said. "It belongs to those who use it to build something better." The final day came quietly. There was no ceremony, just handshakes, group photos, a few jokes exchanged. Brielle hugged Kendra, high-fived Elijah, and promised Ania she'd stay in touch. As she gathered her things, Shaq appeared in the doorway. "You still dance slow?" he asked. She smiled, trying to find a rhythm. They stepped outside together, the mural now complete. She looked up at it, the gears, the hands of the watch, the words Elijah had added in bold beneath it. You are not late. You are right on time. Brielle exhaled. Thank you, she said, for not punishing me. I didn't do it for you, he replied. I did it for what could come through you. They stood there for a moment longer, then parted ways, not like characters concluding a chapter, but like humans stepping into the next one. Later that night, Brielle opened her laptop and drafted an email to the boutique's board of directors. She didn't ask for her job back. She offered a proposal. A partnership between the boutique and the Lucille Initiative. Internships, funding, co-branded mentorships. She titled it, Luxury That Listens, and hit send without hesitation. He never came back. No one made a scene. Some doors closed silently. On an unassuming Wednesday, with the wind brushing against the windows and foot traffic steady but calm, the boutique door opened. Shaq stepped inside. Same hoodie. Same sneakers. Same quiet walk. It had been months since the docuseries dropped, and in that time his name had become both a headline and a compass. But he moved like he always did, without demand. At the front display, Brielle looked up, and this time she smiled. Not the brittle, sales-trained expression of someone preparing to filter value through bias, but a real smile. One that recognized someone not just for who they'd become, but for who they always were. Hey stranger, she said, walking toward him. You're right on time. He gave a soft nod. That new. She pointed up toward the etched window mural. A recent addition. Thought you'd appreciate the message. He glanced at it. I do. Brielle motioned toward the small side counter where a coffee station now lived. Local beans, ceramic mugs. No branding. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea? Shaq raised an eyebrow. Amused. You offering me coffee now? She chuckled. Only if you promise not to leave a second docuseries crew out front. He grinned. No cameras this time. Good. I'd rather this part just be real. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. They stood beside the new display housing his collaboration piece. The watch that had become less about timekeeping and more about truth-telling. It's been the most requested model for weeks, she said. Even people who don't know the full story feel something when they see it. Because it carries something, Shaq replied. And not just on the wrist. He sipped, looked around. The place feels different. It is different. Because of the training? Because of the people. The willingness. The choice to stop pretending perfection and start practicing perspective. Shaq gave a small nod. That's real growth. Not the loud kind. The lasting kind. She studied him for a moment, then asked, What made you come back today? He thought for a second. I wanted to see if the change stayed. And? He looked around once more. Staff chatting with customers without pretense. A teenager at the back counter pointing out a repair design he'd made with a junior manager. A new customer being shown the custom etching menu without anyone asking about their wallet first. Shaq smiled. It stayed. They stood for a while longer, sipping coffee beside a symbol that had once sparked controversy, but now sparked conversation. The boutique wasn't perfect. Nothing truly worth keeping, ever was. But it had transformed, not overnight, but over every small moment when someone chose empathy over ego, awareness over assumption. Later that afternoon, after Shaq had left, hoodie watch and quiet dignity intact, Brielle walked back to the mural window and stood still. Outside, a father held the hand of his daughter, pointing at the mural and reading the words aloud. Time makes room. Brielle turned back to the floor, stepping into the space they were building, not to manage it, to honor it. Time doesn't shout. It waits. It teaches. And if you're quiet enough, humble enough, it speaks in rhythm, in silence, in the space between what was said and what was meant. Shaq's voice drifts in, as the screen fades from black, calm but resonant. People will always watch how you walk, what you wear, how you speak. They'll measure you by moments they don't understand, by silence they haven't earned, by rooms they never had to fight to enter. But the only thing that truly matters is what time has taught you. His words linger like dust catching light. The screen opens onto a modest classroom, not pristine, not polished, but full of possibility. Sunlight streams through half-open blinds. On the whiteboard, Legacy Week, Building What Lasts scrawled in blue marker. 12 kids, mostly boys, mostly black, sit at desks, sneakers tapping gently, notebooks open, pencils fidgeting. Some wear hoodies, some polos. One wears a tie just a little too big for his collar. They look at Shaq like he's more than a guest. He stands in front of the whiteboard, not behind a podium. No suit, no velvet tux. Just jeans, a plain tee, the kind of presence that's been shaped by surviving, reflecting, choosing. He starts without preamble. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind. Now I know, it's about what you pass forward, while you're still here. He paces slowly, pausing between phrases not for drama, but for gravity. People think value comes from the price tag, the house, the watch, but real value, that's built in silence, in how you carry yourself when no one's clapping. A boy in the second row raises his hand. But what if they never see you? Like no matter what you do? Shaq nods, walks over. They might not, he says plainly. Not at first. Maybe not ever. But here's what you remember. Your worth ain't based on their view. It's based on your vision. The room is still. Narration picks up again, flowing beneath footage of the classroom, soft and steady. Sometimes we confuse noise with presence. We think being seen is the goal. But real presence, that's about what you leave people feeling, long after you leave the room. We see Shaq writing on the board. Worth no wealth.
Love nail performance.
Time nail control. Time the opportunity. Then, close up. His wrist. The watch that watched me back. Still warm. Still carrying the stories inside it. Later, as the kids move to breakout tables, Shaq walks over to one in the corner. A boy sits alone, tracing the edge of a worn spiral notebook. His hoodie is deep gray, sleeves stretched from habit. His eyes stay down, but they flick up when Shaq arrives. What's your name? Shaq asks. Donovan, the boy replies. You like watches? Donovan shrugs. Never had one. Shaq smiles. I hadn't either. Not at your age. He sits beside him, close enough to be heard, far enough to leave space. I used to think the only thing I could control was how long I stayed invisible. Thought if I was quiet enough, maybe they'd stop judging me. Then I realized, silence is a choice. So is showing up. Donovan finally meets his eyes. You showed up. A beat. Shaq lifts his wrist, unclasps the watch. The etchings shimmer faintly in the light. He doesn't polish it, doesn't present it with ceremony. He just holds it out. This isn't just time, he says. It's truth. Donovan's eyes widen. You're giving this to me? Shaq nods. It watched me when the world didn't. And now it'll watch you, not just to tell the time but to remind you who you already are. He places it gently in Donovan's hand. The boy clutches it with careful fingers. In the background, another student calls out a question. A girl's voice rings. Mr. O'Neill, what does legacy feel like? Shaq smiles, not turning yet. It feels like this, he answers. And then he looks back at Donovan, now staring at the watch like it holds more than numbers. It does. It holds names. The narration returns, softer now. We wait our whole lives for people to give us permission, to tell us we're worth something. But time, real time, doesn't ask. It teaches, it tests, and if you're lucky, it transforms you. Cut to montage. Brielle helping a teen style their first resume. Cambria sketching beside a young designer at the boutique's new gallery loft. A kid at the Lucille Initiative soldering a gear into a custom-built prototype. A mural unveiling on the boutique wall. Truth takes time. Lucille standing before a classroom, hands clasped, smiling. Donovan, weeks later, walking to school with the watch on his wrist, held steady. Back to Shaq. He's walking through a quiet street now, hoodie on, hands in pockets. People pass by. Some recognize him, others don't. It doesn't matter. The voiceover continues. The world will try to write your story before you've spoken. But time listens. If you write with love, with memory, with truth, time doesn't just keep you. It keeps you honest. He pauses near a bookstore. In the window a small display sign reads, "Never judge a book by the cover, especially when that book built the library." He smiles, then walks on. In the final shot, Shaq enters a new classroom. The sign outside reads, Future Legacy Cohort, Spring. He places a fresh notebook on the desk. Inside the cover, a hand-penned message. You're not late. You're right on time. Fade to black. Then the final words in his voice. Legacy ain't the watch you wear. It's the time you give. Roll credits. If you've ever been underestimated, this story was for you. If you've ever held your truth in silence, It's time to speak. What we wear isn't the story. How we show up. This isn't about fashion. It's about recognition. Because sometimes the quietest ones rewrite everything.